I knew something was wrong the moment the taxi slowed in front of the house. It wasn't just the quiet that made the air feel off, it was the absence of detail. The porch light was off even though I always kept it on when I was out past sundown. The hedges looked clipped too neatly, and the welcome mat was gone, replaced by a thin gray slab with no greeting, no memory. The driver helped me out slowly. My legs were still stiff from the infusion, and the ache in my joints had become a part of my breathing. He set my satchel down beside me and asked if I needed anything else. "No," I said softly. "I've got it from here." He waited a second longer than necessary, like he knew something was off too, then tipped his cap and pulled away. I walked up the steps, one by one, the cold wood creaking under my heels. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the key. It was an old brass one, dull from years of use. I had used it every day since Arthur died. Same lock, same hand motion. But tonight, when I turned the key, I felt it catch, then stop. I tried again, more carefully. Nothing. The lock didn't budge. At first, I thought I had the wrong key. I checked my satchel, emptied every zippered pocket, even pulled out the little tin where I kept the spare. I tried both. Same result. The metal clicked, met resistance, and stayed shut. I stood there staring at the door for a full minute, my hand trembling slightly, from the fatigue. Not panic, just wear. Then the porch light flicked on. I turned, startled. The switch was now inside the house, on a smart system I didn't recognize. Through the window I saw movement. Darren, my stepson. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked prepared. He opened the door partway and leaned against the frame, blocking the entrance. "Carol," he said, voice even. "I thought the clinic was keeping you longer." I stared at him. "They discharged me this morning." "You knew that?" He shrugged. "Well, it's just, the locks were changed while you were away. For security." "For security," I repeated, like the words might make more sense if I said them slower. "Darren, this is my house." He exhaled through his nose, a tired kind of sigh, like he was humoring a child. "It's technically the family house. You've been through a lot. We just..." "Who's we?" I asked. He hesitated. "Look, why don't we talk tomorrow? I can set you up in a hotel for the night. You need rest." "I need to go inside." He didn't move. Behind him, I saw a pile of boxes in the hallway. My boxes, I recognized the one with the faded sticker that read Medical 2020. It had been dragged from my closet. "Why are my things packed?" I asked. He didn't answer. That was the moment something went quiet inside me. A kind of settling. Not grief, not rage. Something colder. I stepped back, stared at him and said, "Open the door." He did, but only a few inches more. "Just come inside so we can talk." I didn't move. "Not like this." "You changed the locks while I was in chemotherapy, Darren." He winced. "I want my files, my medications, my mother's scarf. Everything else can wait." He stepped aside, but barely. I walked in, keeping my back straight, though my ribs still burned from the port they'd removed yesterday. The house smelled different. No more citrus cleaner, no more lavender from the diffuser. It smelled like paint and plastic. Artificial. I walked to the hallway closet and opened it. Empty. In the guest room. What used to be my room. My blankets were folded too perfectly, like I'd already left. "You don't need to stay here anymore, Carol," he said from the doorway. "We found a facility." I turned. "I didn't ask you to find anything." "You're still recovering." "I'm still recovering in my own home." We stared at each other. He broke first. "I'll give you tonight. But this conversation isn't over." He left the room. I sat on the bed, not my sheets, some new polyester ones with a hotel tag still attached. And I felt for the first time in years like an intruder in the place where I'd hosted Christmas, wept over a loss, and built a life one coat hook at a time. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat with my satchel on my lap and opened the side pouch. Inside was a manila envelope. Inside that envelope was a deed, with my name on it. My husband had never removed it, not even after Darren moved in. It was joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Arthur was gone. That left me. The law was clear, but the locks told a different story. I stared at the document until the numbers blurred, then folded it slowly and slipped it back into the envelope. I tucked it beneath the mattress, same as I had before the hospital. Then I leaned back against the headboard and whispered something only Arthur would understand. Looks like I'm going to war in Tweed. By morning, the decision had already made itself. I wasn't staying here. Not like this. Not under his silence and her perfume, with my things boxed and my name slowly scraped off the walls. I rose before the sun, knees stiff, the chemo fatigue making my bones feel hollow. I rinsed my face in the guest bath, still labeled Carol's room, on a little sticky note from 3 years ago. Funny he'd left that, but not the scarf from my mother, or the framed photo of Arthur and me on our 40th anniversary. I slipped the manila envelope back into my satchel and buttoned my coat slowly, deliberately. The tweed scratched slightly against the back of my neck. I liked that. It made me feel real, present. Not one of the phantoms they clearly expected to vanish after a final doctor's visit. Darren wasn't awake when I left. Or if he was, he didn't come out. The sky was still blue-gray when I stepped out and walked toward the corner. I didn't call a cab. I walked 3 blocks before I flagged one down. My chest burned from the effort, but I welcomed it. It meant I was still moving on my own terms. When the cab driver asked where to, I said county registrar's office. He glanced at me in the mirror. That place doesn't open until 9. I know, I said, settling in. I'll wait. We stopped for coffee along the way. His treat, he insisted, and I sipped it slowly while sitting on a cold metal bench outside the office. The sky warmed to daylight. Cars passed. No one looked twice at the old woman, with a satchel and a stare like stone. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked in. The building smelled like paper and old furniture. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I approached the counter. The man behind the glass partition had a tired smile and a voice softened by repetition. Morning. How can I help? I need to check the ownership record for 317 Candler Lane, I said, sliding over my ID. He tapped his keyboard, blinked a few times. Name on the deed? Carol Whitaker. A beat. Then he turned the monitor slightly. There it was, joint tenancy with right of survivorship. Arthur and I. No amendments, no removals. That's me, I said, the tremble in my voice betraying none of the emotion swelling in my chest. He nodded. Still current. Do you need a certified copy? Yes. 3. He began printing. You know, a lot of folks don't realize how powerful joint tenancy is. That deed means you're the sole legal owner now. I nodded once. I know. As I waited, I asked for a list of all recorded modifications or transfer attempts. There were none. That surprised me. Darren hadn't filed anything yet. He'd only changed locks, not the ledger. Can you tell if anyone's filed a petition to alter ownership due to incapacitation? I asked. He raised a brow, then checked. No. But if someone tries, you'll be notified. That's standard procedure. Good. I paid in cash, took the copies, and walked out into the crisp late morning. This time I called a cab to the law office. Mr. Holloway had represented Arthur in a dispute over insurance fraud 10 years ago. He was one of the last people I trusted in this town. His receptionist remembered me. Carol. Oh my goodness. How are you? I'm standing, I said. That's a start. I was in his office 20 minutes later, sitting across from his oak desk while sunlight streamed through the blinds and painted long stripes across the carpet. He looked older, thinner, but still sharp. He offered coffee. I declined. I need to protect the house, I said. I need to make sure no one can touch it, not without a fight. He nodded slowly. Tell me what happened. I told him. Not everything, not yet, but enough. He listened, not interrupting, only jotting notes with a silver pen. When I showed him the deed, he examined it carefully. Good, he said. You're ahead of him. What can I do? I asked. What's the most forceful, legal way to freeze it in place? He leaned back. We can file a unilateral affidavit of ownership. Flag the title. It doesn't change anything but creates a legal barrier. Any attempted transaction will require a court response. It's not bulletproof, but it's a wall. And if you want a second layer, I do. Then we file a notice of intent to protect real property against fraud. It's newer, judges don't love it, but it gets attention, puts pressure on title companies to double-check everything. Good, I said. Do it. He looked at me for a long moment. Carol, this isn't just about property, is it? No, I said, tightening my grip on the satchel. It's about being erased. I'm not letting that happen while I still have marrow in my bones. He nodded once. I'll need you to sign a few things. When it was done, I left a sealed copy in his hands and another in the firm's fireproof storage vault. Back outside, the wind had picked up. I crossed the street slowly, holding my coat shut, the satchel thumping gently against my hip. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even sad. I was something else. I was ready. I returned just before sunset, carrying proof like armor. The lock still clicked uselessly against the key I once trusted. I didn't knock. I simply rang the doorbell and waited. A long pause followed. Then footsteps. He didn't stop me, but I felt the way his eyes tracked the satchel at my side. I thought we agreed. No, I said flatly. You decided. I went to the county registrar and my lawyer. That froze him. He closed the door, slower this time, like he was stalling. Carol, we're just trying to think long term. You've been through a lot. I turned, met his gaze. Don't talk to me like I'm a burden you inherited. He didn't reply. I walked straight to what used to be Arthur's office. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, the desk was covered with open folders, none of them mine. I placed my satchel on the desk and pulled out one certified copy of the deed, sliding it forward. You see that? I asked. He squinted, stepped closer, then read silently. You filed nothing. You have no claim. I continued. And now, there's a legal hold on any transfer involving this property. Anything you try will hit a wall. Darren straightened, jaw tightening. You're making this complicated. No, I said. You made it cruel. He leaned against the doorframe, arms folded. We thought you weren't coming back. After the second round of chemo, the nurse said, Stop. I didn't want to hear it. Not their justifications, not his passive voice trying to paint me as collateral damage. You knew where I was. You had my room packed, the locks changed, and the listing paperwork drafted. He blinked. You went through my files? No, I saw enough in the hallway to understand what you were doing. And then I went through Arthur's, where the truth still lived. There was silence then, only the faint hum of the refrigerator down the hall. He looked at the deed again. So what now? You can live here, for now. I'm not throwing you out, but the decisions about this house are mine again. You don't get to pretend I don't exist. He hesitated, then nodded once, more out of resignation than agreement. I'll talk to Erin, he muttered, already turning to leave. Good, I said. Start by telling her she doesn't need to keep my name off the mailbox anymore. He stopped. She didn't. Yes, she did. I noticed. Then I closed the door softly, but with purpose. I sat in the chair Arthur used for his crosswords, its fabric still worn in the shape of his spine, and placed the deed back into the satchel. For a long moment, I just sat. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and something older, paper, maybe, or history, or him. I let myself feel that. The quiet after a decision. The breath before a longer battle. Later, I made myself a cup of weak tea in the kitchen. Darren and Erin didn't join me. They were upstairs. I heard their voices briefly. Muffled, quick, but I didn't care what they said. Not now. I drank slowly at the kitchen table, using the same mug I'd used for years, World's Okayest Gardener. A gift from Arthur after I killed a rosebush, trying to relocate it. The handle was chipped, but I held it like an heirloom. When I finished, I washed the mug by hand, dried it with the towel I brought from the guest room, and placed it upside down on the drying rack. Then I moved to the hallway, stopping at the linen closet. I opened it quietly. My quilts were gone. In their place were new towels, rolled up like boutique decor. I found a single blanket, shoved at the bottom, the one my niece had made before leaving for Oregon. I took it out, folded it carefully, and brought it to the guest room. The bed still smelled like detergent. I didn't recognize, but I made it my own again. Small gestures, blanket on top, satchel, under the nightstand. Window slightly cracked to let in the chill. I didn't trust the locks. That night, I used a door wedge, an old trick from when Arthur traveled, and I slept light. I'd kept it in my satchel all through the hospital. At 2:17 a.m., I woke up, not to sound, but to the absence of it. I sat up in the dark, eyes adjusting. No footsteps, no voices, just the heavy silence of a house where no one wanted to say what they'd done wrong. I slipped out of bed, walked to the hallway quietly, and stood near the stairs. I didn't go up. I didn't need to. I just stood still, long enough for the weight of my own presence to echo. I wasn't leaving, not because I needed to win, but because I had already been erased once by illness. I wouldn't let them finish the job with indifference. Morning came slow and silent, filtered through gauzy light and the weight of unspoken truths. I sat on the edge of the bed for longer than usual, waiting for my hands to stop shaking. Not from fear, but from the toll Chemo had taken. Still, I dressed carefully, the same tweed coat, still smelling faintly of bus seats and waiting rooms, and slung my satchel over my shoulder like I always did. I opened the guest room door and listened. The upstairs was quiet. I walked into the kitchen, the soles of my shoes silent on the tile. A fresh pot of coffee had been made, but only one mug sat in the sink. Darren must have already left. I poured a half cup and sat at the table, letting the warmth fill my fingers before it reached my chest. Erin appeared halfway through my sip, wearing one of those oatmeal-colored robes that tried too hard to look casual. She startled slightly when she saw me, then smoothed her expression into something neutral. "Oh, Carol. I didn't hear you." I didn't make a sound. She moved toward the counter and opened a box of granola. "Darren mentioned you went to the lawyer." I nodded. "He's thorough. Your plan has a few holes." "I don't know what you're talking about," she said quickly. I set down my mug. "Then let me explain. Changing the locks on a co-owned house is illegal in this state, unless there's a restraining order or an official eviction. You had neither." She stiffened. "We didn't mean to upset you." "You didn't just upset me," I said. "You erased me. You replaced my linens, hid my medication, removed the bench Arthur built from the front porch. What did you think I'd do? Vanish?" Erin didn't respond. She opened the fridge instead, the cool air curling around her robe like mist. "We thought you were tired." "Tired is not the same as gone," I said, rising. She turned sharply. "Carol, I know you've been sick, and we thought maybe you'd want less responsibility. You always said the house was overwhelming." I walked toward her, slow but steady. I said the stairs made my knees ache. Not that I wanted my life handed off like yard clippings. She flushed and closed the fridge a little too hard. "I need access to the attic," I said. Her eyes flickered. "The attic? Yes. I believe a few of my documents were moved without my consent. The filing cabinet is up there, right?" She hesitated. "Darren said you didn't need any of that. But it's still mine." She crossed her arms, as if deciding whether to argue or comply. Eventually she relented. "Let me get the step stool." I followed her down the hall. She retrieved the folding stool from the laundry closet, opened the hallway hatch, and stepped aside. "Mind the insulation," she muttered. I climbed slowly, legs protesting, the ladder wobbling just slightly under my weight. I gripped the sides hard, then pulled myself into the attic. It smelled like dust and pine. The light bulb buzzed overhead, casting long shadows over cardboard boxes and a few folded tarps. I crouched carefully, knees popping, and made my way to the back. I found it easily. Arthur's old metal file cabinet, tucked behind a stack of unused frames and a broken floor lamp. The top drawer was locked, but the second was slightly ajar. I pulled it open. Tax returns, receipts, medical summaries, and near the back, a folder labeled Refinance. I opened it. There it was. A signed refinance agreement dated only 8 months before Arthur's death. It had both our names. Darren's wasn't listed anywhere. I scanned the document with my phone, taking clear, well-lit photos of every page. Then I placed it carefully into the envelope I had brought in my satchel. Behind me, I heard Erin's voice. "Carol?" I turned. She hadn't climbed up, but her voice carried just enough concern to mask something else, nervousness. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Just reclaiming what's mine," I said. When I came back down, she watched me closely. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to confirm something," I said. She tilted her head. "Like what?" "That your husband forgot something important. That Arthur never took me off the title. That his plan, your plan, only works if I don't have proof." Her jaw set, but she didn't argue. Back in the guest room, I uploaded the scans to the shared folder I had with my attorney. Then I texted his assistant. "Confirmed dual refinance. My name remains. Uploaded all docs. Less than 10 minutes later, she replied, "Got it. You're fully covered. We'll draft the affidavit for supplemental ownership today." I closed the phone and sat back in the chair. They had underestimated me. Maybe because I was older. Maybe because I walked slowly. Maybe because grief softens a person's silhouette, and they assumed that softness meant surrender. But I knew how to document things. I knew the law, and more importantly, I knew my husband. Arthur had protected me even after death. The papers we signed were quiet insurance against the kind of betrayal I now faced. I glanced at the attic ladder still hanging in the hallway. They thought the house would transition like a narrative shift. But memory isn't drywall. You can't just repaint it and call it yours. The next 2 days passed with a strange stillness. Not quiet, exactly, but a kind of artificial calm, like walking on frozen water that might crack with the wrong sentence. Darren avoided me. Erin hovered, always near but never engaging, as if proximity might earn her credit for civility. I moved through the house deliberately, visible, composed, unmistakably present. The guest room was mine again, but I kept my things packed in the satchel, and I never left it unattended. At night, I wedged the door with a rubber stopper and placed the deed beneath the mattress like a talisman. Old habits return quickly when you've had something stolen, even if it's just peace. On Thursday morning, I woke early, the air sharp through the cracked window. I brewed coffee in silence, still using the chipped world's okayest gardener mug. The spoon clinked against the porcelain, with a sound that felt almost defiant. Erin entered the kitchen as I poured a second cup. "You're up early," she said. "I'm old," I replied. She gave a thin smile and reached for a banana. "Darren's out for the morning. Had a meeting with someone about something financial." "Of course he did." I sipped my coffee. "He should be careful what paperwork he signs." Her fingers tightened slightly around the banana, but she said nothing. I left the kitchen before she could pretend to make small talk. Instead, I went to the den, Arthur's old study, and opened a narrow drawer beneath the bookshelf. I found what I was looking for, an unopened letter addressed to Arthur, postmarked nearly a year after he died. I remembered the sender, a former client from his consulting years. I kept it, proof of how quickly people forget even the best of us. I carried it to the table, sat down, and began flipping through the documents I had collected: deed copies, refinance paperwork, notarized will excerpts, and the new affidavit my lawyer had emailed just this morning. I printed 2 copies. The legal language was dense, but the heart of it was simple. I had retained ownership, not only by survivorship, but by recent contribution and continued residence. The affidavit would go on file tomorrow. That meant any attempt to sell, lease, refinance, or transfer title would trigger a notification to me and legal intervention if needed. My phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Holloway's office. "File draft looks solid. Sign and return scanned copy today. Full copy gets filed in 24 hours. I responded with a thumbs up and stood, straightening my coat. That's when I heard the garage door open. Darren was home. I stayed in the den, letting him come to me. A few minutes passed. The sound of a coat being hung, footsteps. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the papers spread out. "You've been busy," he said. I looked up. "You've been reckless." He crossed his arms. "I met with a financial planner, just exploring options." "Did you tell him you don't own the house you were offering as collateral?" His jaw shifted, but he didn't answer. I gestured to the folder. "This affidavit goes on record tomorrow. Once it does, even the appearance of fraud becomes traceable. So if you're hiding anything, paperwork, conversations, back-channel applications, it's time to think carefully about how much of this you want to see unravel in court." "Carol." "No," I said. "Let's be clear. You tried to gut the house of me while I was still alive. That wasn't just unkind, it was strategic, and it failed." He stepped into the room slowly, but I held up a hand. "I'm not going to throw you out, but from this point forward, any decisions about this house go through legal review. I have an estate plan in place, a hard copy of every legal interaction, and backups in multiple locations. If you try anything again, the damage will be permanent, and not to me." His face darkened. "You think this is about money?" "No, I think this is about control, and you thought I didn't have any left." He stood there a moment longer, like he might argue, but then he left. I packed the papers carefully into the satchel and zipped it shut. That night, Erin made a show of civility. She brought me tea, her tone syrupy. "Lemon chamomile," she said, holding out the mug. I didn't reach for it. "You first," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Take a sip." Her hand hesitated. She laughed too loud, too quick. "Carol, come on." I said nothing. She placed the mug on the table and left the room. I stared at it for a long time before pouring it down the sink. The following morning, I signed the affidavit and scanned it from a corner print shop downtown. I paid in cash, printed 3 copies, and sealed 2 into separate envelopes. One I mailed, one I kept. When I returned, the front door was ajar. Inside, I found Erin in the living room, boxing up her seasonal decorations. "You're heading somewhere?" I asked. She looked over her shoulder. "Just making room. Darren said we needed to declutter." I noticed the large family portrait from the mantel had been taken down. In its place was a generic canvas of wind-blown grasses and pale skies. A house with no names. I stepped forward and looked her straight in the eye. "You can remove the photos, repaint the walls, but I'll still be here." She forced a smile. "Of course you will. But I won't be watching quietly anymore." Erin gave a short nod, then returned to her boxes. On Sunday, I found the piano bench in the garage. It was Arthur's, the one he refinished after his second back surgery. He used to store sheet music and random things inside, postcards, thumbtacks, once even a crumpled love note I never wrote. We never owned a piano. He just liked the idea of having something that opened both upward and forward. Now, it sat beside a pile of items marked "Donate" in thick black marker. 2 cardigans of mine were folded on top. I crouched beside it, slowly, legs stiff from the morning. The tweed coat stretched at the shoulders. As I lowered myself, I opened the bench. Inside, the contents were gone. The felt lining was peeled slightly at the corner, as if someone had tugged too hard trying to empty it. I sat there for a while, fingers brushing the dust from the rim. The garage door creaked behind me. "I didn't know what it was," Darren said, holding a box. He stood in jeans and a fleece hoodie, a little too relaxed for the tension he was stepping into. "You knew what it wasn't," I replied. "It wasn't yours." He looked down, shifting the box from arm to arm. "We thought clearing out a few things might help. Reset the energy." "Did you clear out Erin's mother's things after she passed?" His jaw clenched slightly. "No," he muttered. "We kept a few things. For Emma." "You didn't pack her grief into cardboard." "Carol." "I'm not done grieving either," I said quietly. "And I'm not dead." He stood there, letting the silence stretch. Then he placed the box on a shelf and walked back inside without another word. I stood, the ache sharp in my knees, and lifted the piano bench lid one more time. Still empty. Still open. Still back inside. I set it at the foot of my guest bed. If nothing else, it deserved a place among the living. That afternoon, I made a list. Not of assets or legal defenses. I already had those. This list was quieter, stranger. I titled it, "What Remains." I wrote down the smell of Arthur's shaving cream in the top drawer, the chip on the back deck where Emma dropped a snow globe, the photo booth strip from our trip to Monterey, still wedged behind the mirror. These were things they couldn't itemize or erase, no matter how many boxes they filled. That evening, I heard Erin on the phone. The guest bathroom vents carried sound. I didn't try to eavesdrop. I simply brushed my teeth slowly, letting the words trickle in. "She's not budging." "No, she filed something. I think Darren underestimated." "Yeah, legal. I don't know. Maybe we just need to wait her out." "Wait me out!" As if I were a storm to endure. I turned off the faucet and dried my hands. Back in my room, I opened my satchel and pulled out a small frame. It was one of the few items I had saved before the hospital. Our wedding photo, Arthur in his only suit, me in a borrowed dress, with wrinkled sleeves and hope in my eyes. I set it on the nightstand and angled it toward the door. Let them see who built this place. The next morning, I rose early and called the locksmith. "I need a consultation," I said, discreet. The man on the line didn't ask why. He offered an appointment at noon. I accepted. When the locksmith arrived, I met him at the door. "Is it a security upgrade?" he asked. "Let's call it a reset." I said, guiding him inside. He walked the perimeter with me, noting the back door, the old slider in the kitchen, the access panel from the garage. I pointed to the front door. I need full control, new keys, a digital padlock, maybe. Want access sharing or full restriction? Restriction, I said firmly. Only my code, no backups. He didn't flinch. We can do that. He quoted a price. I paid in cash. He returned with tools and got to work immediately. By 3 p.m., the doors had new locks, the keypad installed, and the spares in my pocket. When Darren returned, he tried his old key. I heard it from the hallway. The rattle, the pause, then the knock. I opened the door just enough to see his face. I had it changed, I said, for safety. His eyes flickered. You didn't tell me. No, I said. I didn't. He stepped back. That's a bold move. So was replacing me before I was even discharged. He looked past me, into the living room. I still live here. You do, I said. And I've given you no reason to fear I'll remove you, but you'll come and go on my terms now. He exhaled. This isn't going to last, Carol. No, I said. This is the beginning. I closed the door gently. Not a slam. Just final. That evening, after the new locks had settled into their quiet vigil, I brewed chamomile tea. Not from a tea bag, but from the dried blossoms I had tucked in the inside pocket of my satchel. They had survived 3 hospitals, 1 relocation, and an attempted exile. It felt right to steep them now. I sat at the kitchen table and listened to the house breathe. The wind rattled the gutter just above the window. The refrigerator hummed. My chair creaked beneath the slow shifting of my bones. It was the first time in months I felt home. At 6:42 p.m., Erin came down the stairs, coat over her arm, bag on her shoulder. Her makeup was freshly applied, more effort than I'd seen in weeks. Darren's at his sister's, she said without meeting my eyes. I'm going to meet him there. I nodded. You might want to take your own car. He doesn't have a key anymore. She hesitated, then nodded. We're just talking. Talk can be expensive, I replied, sipping. She didn't answer. Just before she stepped out, I added, if you're thinking of coming back after dark, text me first. I'll unlock the door. Erin gave a sharp smile, more tooth than warmth, and left without responding. I listened to her heels click down the walk, the pause as she fumbled with her keys, and finally the engine coughing to life. Then, silence again. I finished my tea. Later that night, I walked the perimeter of the house, not checking locks, checking memory, my memory. The yard still bore the imprint of old arguments and reconciliations. The fence I painted in '96. The pavers we laid down before Darren's graduation. Even the warped garden gnome Arthur refused to toss. I paused near the hydrangeas, now bare, their leaves curled in early frost. I traced the edge of one branch with my finger and thought of Arthur, always pruning too early, always saying, we grow better when we're cut back. Inside, I retrieved my ledger from the satchel. I flipped past the section labeled Medical and found the pages titled Lines I Never Crossed. I added a new one, letting someone believe kindness is permission. The next morning, I called my lawyer. I need to begin the process for a living trust, I said. I thought we already secured the affidavit and title. Holloway replied. We did, I said. But now, I want clarity. In writing. With witnesses. I want every room, every brick, accounted for. He scheduled a notary visit for the end of the week. That gave me time. I pulled a box from the top of the guest room closet, the one I hadn't opened since Arthur's funeral. It contained old letters, tax records, a velvet pouch with our wedding bands, and a cassette tape labeled CWH. Arthur used to record my answering machine messages because he said my gruffness masked treasure. I didn't have a player to hear it anymore, but I held the tape like it still whispered. Then I opened a second envelope. Inside was Arthur's last signed note. It wasn't a will, just a post-it he'd left inside the pantry drawer, dated 2 days before his stroke. In case I forget, I want Carol to keep everything, even the ugly lamps. Especially the ugly lamps. I folded it gently and placed it inside my satchel. That night, I called Emma, my granddaughter. She was 14 now, just old enough to think she wasn't a child, just young enough to believe no one was watching. She answered on the 3rd ring. Nana? Hi, sweet pea. You okay? Better today, I said. Are your parents nearby? Nope, they're talking in the driveway. Good. Do you remember the garden bench? The one with the squirrel carved on the side? That's the one. Would you like to have it someday? She paused. I guess. I mean, yeah, it's kind of ours, right? It is, I said. I just wanted to hear it from you. Another pause. Did they do something again? She asked. I didn't answer that directly. Just remember this. Things can be taken away, but not everything should be easy to give. Emma was quiet for a beat, then said, I miss the smell of your house. I smiled into the receiver. Come by this weekend. I'll burn the old cinnamon candle. The one that made Darren sneeze. She giggled. Okay, she said, I'll find a way. We said goodbye and I sat still for a long time afterward, holding the phone long after the call ended. The next morning, I wrote my name in blue ink on the inside spine of every book in the house I still considered mine, one by one. I didn't need to leave the gesture for anyone but myself. Ownership is a strange thing. Sometimes it's about paper. Sometimes it's about claiming space that others try to carve you out of. Sometimes it's as small as a signature in the margin of a forgotten book. I'd forgotten how many sounds a house makes when it's trying to remember who belongs in it. Floorboards stretch like old joints, heating pipes hum with breath, and doors, if you let them begin to close more slowly, like they're listening again. In the weeks after I changed the locks, the house quieted, not in defeat, but in recognition. It was no longer resisting me. It was adjusting. Darren came by once to retrieve some files. He texted ahead. He'd learned. We didn't speak beyond what was necessary. He stayed in the office. I stayed in the kitchen. I heard his footsteps overhead once, probably checking if I'd changed the locks on the attic too. I hadn't. I didn't need to. Some things, once protected, don't need to be guarded twice. Aaron hadn't returned since their dinner at his sister's. I didn't ask about it. Instead, I turned my attention to something I hadn't touched in months, the walls. Arthur and I had painted nearly every room of the house ourselves over the years. Some walls still wore the ghosts of old colors, apricot in the dining room, slate in the hallway. None of it fancy, but all of it chosen. I opened the closet near the laundry and found the paint samples, dozens. Some dated, some smudged with handwritten notes. Too cold. Looks better in morning light. Arthur hates this. I smiled at that one. I set up a workspace in the garage, pulling out old brushes, sandpaper, tarps. My knees didn't love the bending, but my hands remembered the rhythm. The smell of fresh paint, sharp, nostalgic, rose into the air like a private protest against all the ways they tried to overwrite me. By midweek, I had finished the guest bathroom and started on the den. I painted around the old thermostat, around Arthur's pencil marks on the doorframe where he used to measure Darren's height. I left those untouched. Even covered in a fresh coat, the house would remember. On Thursday, a package arrived. Not addressed to me, but to C.W. Hamilton. My full name, not Carolyn, and certainly not Grandma, Mom, or Miss. Just initials. Inside was a small book of poems. No note, but I knew the handwriting on the return label. Arthur's former colleague. They had exchanged books during slow winters. He must have mailed it late, unaware of Arthur's passing. The postmark was dated nearly 8 months back. I flipped through the pages, several lines underlined, all in a hand I didn't recognize, but one stood out. A name said only once, with meaning can echo longer than a lifetime whispered. I copied that into my ledger under a new heading, What They Forgot I Remembered. That night, I retrieved the old photo album, the one we never digitized. I sat cross-legged on the living room rug and flipped through the pages, not for nostalgia, for clarity. Photos. Don't lie. There was one of Darren, maybe 12, perched beside Arthur on the roof during a shingle repair gone wrong. Arthur had a smear of tar across his temple and was grinning like a boy. The caption read, Fixes, questionable, bond, permanent. I set the album beside me and looked around. This house had been painted with our mistakes, lit by our inside jokes, and shaped by our silences, just as much as our songs. I wasn't preserving it out of grief. I was reclaiming it from erasure. The next morning, I scheduled a consultation with a home historian. Usually people want appraisals or architectural reports, the woman said when she arrived. I want a story, I replied. One with names. We walked the property together. She took photos, asked questions. I showed her the pencil marks in the doorway, the nail above the fireplace, where Arthur always hung the same wreath every December, even in years without a tree. She smiled. You know, not many people think to document this. They tried to sell this house while I was still breathing. I said, I need proof it was mine in more ways than paper. She nodded slowly. Understood. When she left, I felt the weight of the past less like a burden, more like insulation. Later that afternoon, Emma arrived. Her face lit up when I opened the door. Smells like paint, she said, wrinkling her nose. Better than air freshener, I replied. Come in. We sat on the floor with the photo album between us. I let her ask questions, and I didn't skip the hard parts. Did Dad really change the locks? She asked softly. I nodded. She bit her lip. Why? Fear, pressure, maybe even hope that I wouldn't come back. But you did. I touched her hand gently. I always do. She studied the pictures again, then asked, What happens now? Now, I said. We make sure this house remembers us. She blinked. Like ghosts? Like witnesses. That evening, I showed her how to mix paint. She laughed at how badly she stirred it the first time, splattering the tarp. We painted one wall in the upstairs hallway together. Just one, but I let her sign it behind the frame we planned to hang. Emma Hamilton, in loopy letters. Underneath, in my hand, still here. The sun was low when Emma left, her sneakers squeaking softly on the wood as she hugged me goodbye. She didn't say much, just pressed her cheek against mine and whispered, You made it feel like home again. That stayed with me, not because it was sweet, but because it meant the house had been something else before, something colder. After she left, I went to the guest room, opened my ledger, and stared at the heading I had written days earlier, lines I never crossed. It felt too soft now, too safe. I drew a new line under it, and lines they thought I couldn't. I paused, then turned the page. A new heading, centered and underlined. Endgame. It was time. I reviewed my estate planning documents, checking for loopholes, for language Darren or Aaron might twist. Everything held firm. The trust was active. The affidavit on file. A recorded deed now bore only my name. I had even emailed a scanned copy of Arthur's handwritten post-it to my lawyer, asking him to attach it to the permanent file. He called it sentimental reinforcement. That evening, I cooked myself dinner. A small pot of lentils with bay leaf and garlic. A heel of rustic bread. A single glass of table wine, dusty from the rack, opened not for celebration, but for closure. I hadn't cooked in that kitchen in nearly 5 months. It felt like touching a memory I thought was gone forever. Mine, whole and intact. Halfway through my meal, my phone buzzed. Darren, can we talk? Just us? I stared at the message for a long while. Then I typed, tomorrow, 10 a.m., in the den. His reply was quick. Thanks. I didn't sleep much that night. Not from anxiety, there was none left, but from the ache that comes when you're nearing the end of something long and personal. Not a war, a siege, silent, creeping, and soul-taxing. At 10 a.m. sharp, Darren entered the den. He wore a button-up shirt, jeans, no coat. His hair was damp, like he'd showered right before coming. He looked more like my boy in that moment than he had in months. I didn't offer him a seat. He took one anyway. I know what we did wasn't right, he said, before I could even speak. It wasn't just about the house. Erin, she was panicking. Money's tight. And when you got sick, you thought you could move faster than grief, I said. He looked down. I tried to justify it, he admitted. Told myself, we were helping you. That maybe, if we made things easier, you wouldn't feel the weight of everything so much. By taking away everything? I asked, steady. It wasn't personal, he whispered. Then that was your first mistake. He blinked. I am not a figure on a spreadsheet, Darren. I am not a movable asset. You took my space, erased my rhythms, buried my memories under beige rugs and Pottery Barn pillows. I know. No, I said firmly. You hoped I wouldn't notice. He fell quiet. Then he said, I don't expect forgiveness. That's good, because I haven't offered it. He nodded, absorbing that. But I am offering clarity, I added. This house will never be yours. It won't be part of your inheritance. It will go to Emma, and only her. His eyes widened, just slightly. I'm not punishing you, I continued. I'm preserving something. A lineage of care that you interrupted. He looked up. Does Emma know? She helped paint the hallway last week. She signed her name beneath a frame. You never noticed. He pressed a hand to his temple, like he might hold the shame in place. You're not banished, I said, but you're not central anymore. He swallowed. That's fair. No, it's simply true. He stood slowly. I'll make arrangements, he said. I trust you will. Before he left, he turned once more in the doorway. He wouldn't have liked how I handled this. He would have thrown you off the porch, I said dryly. Darren cracked a small, sad smile. Yeah, probably. Then, he was gone. I stood there for a long time, feeling the echo of that door closing. Later that day, I walked the garden path, now just a row of brown stalks and sleeping soil. I bent slowly at the waist and pulled out a small stone marker. Arthur had once carved. It had our initials, and beneath, built on patience. I carried it back inside and placed it in the center of the mantel, right where the family photo used to sit. That evening, I made one more call, the local land trust. They picked up on the second ring. I'd like to talk about legacy donations, I said. I explained the basics. Upon my passing, the house would go to Emma, but I wanted the grounds, the trees, the little strip of unremarkable land in back where wild mint grew, to be protected too. We can create a clause, the man said. It's rare, but doable. I smiled. That's what I specialize in. When the call ended, I picked up my ledger again. Under endgame, I wrote the final note. Let them think they left a mark. I left roots. Then I closed the book. By the time the first cold rain came, the trees were already bare. The garden looked stripped of everything except intention. Beds mulched, stalks cut low, stones turned. Nothing wasted. I stood on the back porch with a mug of black coffee and watched the mist fold around the edges of the yard. It was the same scene Arthur and I had looked out on every November, but it felt different now. It wasn't emptier, it was quieter. Like the land had taken a breath and held it. Inside, the house was clean. Lived in, yes, but curated now. The piano bench sat at the end of the guest bed, not as furniture but as memory. The framed photo of Arthur had returned to the wall above my writing desk, next to Emma's crooked signature behind the hallway painting. Even the little chip on the tile near the refrigerator, once a source of Aaron's endless complaints, remained. I had stopped apologizing for it. Some marks weren't flaws, they were facts. I had lived through illness, through being made a stranger in my own home, through a son's betrayal disguised as practicality, and now I had lived beyond the point they thought I'd fade. But I wasn't simply surviving anymore. I was watching again, listening, documenting. That day, I pulled out a faded shoebox from the hall closet, the one that had survived 3 downsizings and 2 near donations. It contained dozens of old receipts, slips of paper, napkins, with scribbled notes, useless to anyone else. But each one meant something to me. A pie crust recipe I had invented in 1987. A grocery list with Arthur's spidery print that read, milk, batteries. Surprise for At the very bottom was an old Polaroid I'd nearly forgotten me, standing in front of this very house, years ago when it was still new to us. My braid was shorter then, but my posture was the same. Head high, back straight, fingers curled around a folded deed I was too afraid to lose. I set the photo beside my ledger and wrote beneath it, "This is what ownership looks like." Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter, not an email, not a text, a real letter, on lined paper, using the pen Arthur had given me on our 40th anniversary. I wrote to Emma, "My dearest girl, someday you'll inherit this house." That sounds grander than it is. I know, but it's more than a place. It's a record. It's walls that knew your laugh before you could spell your name. I want you to know what it took to keep it. Not so you'll feel guilt, but so you'll carry it with intention. Don't let them convince you that kindness is weakness, or that dignity only belongs to the young. The world will try to make you smaller, to fit its own blueprints, but the strongest roots grow in soil no one bothered to claim. You are that soil, and everything good will grow from you. Love always, Nana. I folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope marked with her name. I tucked it into the back of the ledger, behind the page titled Endgame, where I had once written, "Let them think they left a mark, I left roots." That afternoon, I took my satchel and caught a ride to the courthouse. I asked the clerk to retrieve the current recorded deed. She printed it for me without question. When she passed it across the counter, I read every word like scripture, not because I doubted its accuracy, but because I needed to feel it again, see my name and confirm, for myself, that it was no longer a matter of argument, that the locks I'd changed weren't just metal, they were metaphors. Before I left, I asked if I could file one last document. The clerk looked up. "What kind of document?" "Declaration of living use," I said. "Notarized, voluntary." "You're declaring residence?" "I'm declaring presence," I said. She blinked. "That's not usually how it's phrased." "I'm not usual." She smiled faintly, then nodded. "We can attach it to your title. Public record." That was all I needed. I signed, dated, and handed it over. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I stood on the porch and looked at the door, the keypad lock, the tiny wreath I'd just hung for winter, even though no one had asked me to decorate. Then I reached into my coat pocket and touched the folded copy of the deed, like a talisman. This was not vengeance. This was not victory. This was continuity. I stepped inside, removed my coat, and hung my satchel on the same hook Arthur had installed decades ago, just beneath the thermostat. The wood was worn. So was I. But both still held. 3 days later, I opened the front door without hesitation. Not to welcome someone, but to let something go. The wind was sharp that morning, mid-December, bone cold. The kind of air that pressed into your lungs and didn't ask permission. I stood in the doorway with a blanket over one shoulder and a small cardboard box in my hands. Inside the box, a cracked mug Aaron had gifted me. One Mother's Day, a set of unopened herbal teas, a cookbook with its corners still sharp, and the framed quote that used to hang near the entryway. "In this house, we do second chances." It had felt aspirational back then. Now, it read like a threat. I placed the box on the porch bench. Then I walked back in and left the door ajar. If they wanted closure, they could pick it up themselves. I had nothing left to mail. Back inside, I checked the kettle, water not yet boiling. The window above the sink was fogged at the corners. I wiped a patch clear and watched the street. No sign of them yet. I set the kitchen table with 2 mugs anyway. One for me, one in case Emma came by again. No text from her, but she'd gotten in the habit of arriving when I least expected it. That, too, I had grown to count on. I sat down, opened my ledger, and flipped to a blank page. The heading came quickly. Inheritance of Silence. Beneath it I wrote, "The way the hallway absorbs afternoon light." The creak on stair 4. The smell of the linen closet in late winter. The sound of keys hitting the side table. The fact that I never needed to say, "This is mine," because the walls already knew. The kettle whistled. I stood, poured water over the chamomile blossoms, and sat back down. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Still no car. I didn't mind. Every minute they didn't come felt like confirmation. They were learning to let go too. The second mug stayed untouched. I left it there anyway. Not for them, for memory. As I sipped, I glanced at the window again. Instead of a car, a figure approached on foot. Emma. She wore a too large sweatshirt and had her hands in her pockets. Her cheeks were red from the cold, and her breath came out in puffs like soft smoke. I opened the door wider as she reached the step. "You walking now?" I asked, smiling. "Mom forgot I had the day off," she said with a shrug. "I figured I'd use it." I waved her in. She paused to glance at the box on the bench. "Should I bring that in?" "No," I said gently. "That's for the past." She stepped inside, removed her shoes, and followed me to the kitchen. "You made tea?" "Always," I replied. We sat. She cupped the warm mug in both hands like it was treasure. After a few minutes of quiet, she said, "I heard them arguing last night." I waited. "They're mad about the house. About the trust. Dad said you're being vindictive." I raised an eyebrow. "You think I am?" Emma took a slow sip. "No. I think you're being exact." I smiled. She reached into her backpack and pulled out a thin notebook. I started writing things down, she said. About the house. About you. I thought, if someday someone asked me how it felt to grow up here, I wouldn't want to forget. I blinked. For a moment, my throat felt too tight for words. May I see? She slid it across the table. I flipped to a random page. The living room always smells like old books and lemon oil. Nana hums when she cleans, but only when she thinks no one's listening. Another. She talks to the garden like it's alive. Maybe it. I closed the notebook and placed my hand over hers. You're already writing our legacy. Emma looked up, eyes soft. I just don't want people to forget what matters. They won't, I said. Not if you keep reminding them. She stayed a few hours. We made soup from scratch. I let her pick which herbs to add. When she left, she carried a small wrapped package, Arthur's old compass. I told her it didn't point north, it pointed home. She nodded like she understood. After she left, I took the box from the porch and placed it inside the garage. Not because I'd changed my mind, but because even rejection deserves shelter. That evening, I went upstairs, opened the window wide, and breathed in the night. It smelled of mint and wood smoke, of something ending, and something else beginning. The snow came overnight, not a flurry, but a slow, stubborn fall that blanketed everything with quiet authority. By morning, the front lawn was untouched, pure as paper before ink. I stood at the window with my fingers wrapped around a warm mug, watching the branches bow under the soft weight of winter. It was a Thursday, and the courthouse had just opened by the time I called. I'd like to come in to finalize the deed restrictions, I told Holloway's assistant, before the year ends. She paused. You mean the freezing clause? Yes. The one that ensures no one alters ownership without direct consent while I'm still alive and for 5 years after I pass. I have it ready, she replied. You'll just need to sign and notarize. I hung up and sat down at the table. For a long while, I didn't move. I just stared at the copy of the trust agreement sitting before me, corners curling from age and use. This wasn't revenge. This was protection in its purest form. I changed into my winter coat, the heavy one with the brass buttons, and added a knit scarf Emma had made for me last year. My braid tucked easily beneath my hat, and I slipped the folded paperwork into my satchel with practiced care. When I arrived at the courthouse, the clerk already had the file open. We didn't exchange pleasantries, just facts. The notary read the freezing clause aloud, and I nodded with each paragraph. This deed shall not be amended, reassigned or released by any party, blood or otherwise, for the duration of the declarant's natural life, nor for a period of 5 calendar years thereafter, unless by written consent of the sole heir designated within. I signed, stamped, dated, sealed. When I exited, the wind caught my coat and billowed it out, like a sail. I stood on the courthouse steps for a moment, holding the deed against my chest with both hands. My fingers trembled, but not from cold. It was the weight of finality and relief. I caught a cab home. Along the way, I passed streets I hadn't walked in months, corner shops still aglow with holiday garlands, benches crusted with ice, windows filled with quiet dinners and folded warmth. Life was continuing. But for the first time in a long while, I felt part of it again. Back home, I opened the deed and placed it inside the cedar box. Arthur had built me on our 35th anniversary. The box still smelled faintly of linseed and thyme. I locked it, placed it on the middle shelf in my study, and slid the key into my ledger. Then, I sat at my desk. I didn't write another list. Instead, I drew just a sketch, clumsy, but true. The outline of the house, the slope of the roof, the way the back steps curved inward slightly, as if the house itself was leaning to listen. Beneath it, I wrote, "A house becomes a home when it refuses to forget you." It was dark when the knock came. 3 sharp raps. I opened the door and found Darren standing in the snow. No coat, no umbrella, just a man holding a brown envelope in both hands, like it might burn him. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped aside. He wiped his boots instinctively and entered slowly, eyes scanning the walls, the floor, the ceiling like he was looking for something left of himself. "What brings you?" I asked. He didn't answer at first, just handed me the envelope. Inside was a letter, typed, "I relinquish any claim, interest or intent toward the property located at 311 Harrison Lane. effective immediately and without condition. It was signed, witnessed, dated yesterday. I looked up. I thought you might need it on record, he said. I already have that. I know, he said softly, but I needed to do it anyway. I folded the letter and placed it on the table. I never wanted to steal from you, he added. I know, I said, but you did want to inherit without cost. He winced. I was scared. I was dying, I replied. Silence. Then he said, Emma's been writing about you. I read a few pages. My brow lifted. And, she sees you. I nodded. I hope so. He looked around again. The house feels different. It is. He stepped back toward the door. Do you want to come in for tea? I asked, surprising even myself. He hesitated. Not yet. Maybe next time. I nodded once, then closed the door gently behind him. The wind picked up. I returned to the study and tucked the envelope beside the locked cedar box. 2 truths. Side by side. Not equal, but complete. Then I returned to the front porch and stood in the stillness. My hands rested lightly on the frame of the door, fingertips grazing the metal of the new lock. Behind me, the lights inside glowed golden. Before me, the night waited. And somewhere in between, I had become unmovable. There's a sound a house makes when it exhales. Not creaks or wind, it's subtler, like the walls remember you're safe again and settle into their own rhythm. The morning after Darren's visit, I heard it. The air was still. The snow had crusted into firm glitter outside, and light sifted in through the lace curtains above the kitchen sink. I stood at the stove in wool socks, frying a single egg in the skillet. Arthur once insisted was seasoned, not old. I cracked pepper over the top, not out of habit, but out of care. Not everything we do to survive is ritual. Sometimes it's reverence. Emma arrived just as I was drying the dishes. She didn't knock anymore. Hi, Nana, she said, brushing snow off her boots. You're early. I wanted to show you something. She unzipped her backpack and pulled out a stack of stapled pages. I could tell by the way the corners were bent that it had been read and reread, likely by her hands and heart both. It's for school, but really, it's for us. She placed it on the table. I dried my hands on the towel and sat beside her, opening the first page. Inheritance, a memoir by Emma Hamilton. I read the first line aloud. The first time I realized a house could feel love was the day I heard it sigh when my grandmother came home. I stopped. Emma waited, nervous. I hope that's okay, she said, that I used your story. It's not my story anymore, I replied, my throat catching. It's ours. She beamed. For the next hour I read. She'd written about the paint in the hallway, the letters I kept, the day I made soup, and let her choose the herbs. She described the garden like a cathedral, the ledger like a gospel, and me, as the woman who reminded silence it could roar. I closed the pages slowly. You've written more than a school assignment, I said. I know. You've written a witness. Emma reached into her coat pocket and took out a small velvet pouch. I got you something, she said. I opened it and found a brass key. It's just a symbol, she said quickly. It doesn't open anything, but it's engraved. I held it up to the light. Tiny letters etched across the bow. Stayed. She looked down. You stayed when they tried to move you. You stayed when they said you couldn't. You stayed until staying meant something again. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I rose from the table and walked to the mantel. I moved Arthur's compass aside, then placed the brass key at the center of the shelf. You gave it a place, I said. You gave me one first, she replied. That afternoon, we spent hours sorting through old letters, recipes, and newspaper clippings. Some we saved, some we let go. Not everything needed to be held onto, just what anchored us. By dusk, the house was quiet again. Emma curled up in the armchair, dozing beneath the quilt I'd stitched back in '92. I watched the snow fall through the living room window, tracing the same drifts I'd once feared I'd never walk through again. I stood slowly and crossed to my writing desk. There, I opened my ledger to the final page, the last heading, What Remains? And beneath it, I wrote, a door no longer locked in fear, a deed written in ink and in will, a girl who listened, a woman who stayed, a house that remembered both. I closed the ledger. The cover was worn, but the spine held strong. I left it on the desk, beside the letter I'd written to Emma. Then I walked through the house one last time that night, not as a check, not in worry, but in gratitude. I touched the hallway wall with its fresh coat of paint and Emma's signature hidden beneath the frame. I passed the photo of Arthur, smiling in the sun, and whispered, "We're all right." In the kitchen, I turned off the small light above the stove, and at the door, I stood for a long time. Outside, the wind stirred the snow into soft spirals, like smoke from a memory. I stepped onto the porch, wrapped my coat tighter, and faced the street. No cars, no footsteps, just stillness. The quiet of a story completed, not erased, not rewritten, lived. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt true. That was more than enough.